Well, a very good evening and thank you for joining us on India Business Hour. I'm Ashmit Kumar and here are the headlines that we're tracking this evening.
We're moving from the autopilot era of AI to co-pilot era of AI. So if anything, I feel, yes, it's moving fast, but moving fast in the right direction.
Artificial intelligence is moving fast, but it's moving in the right direction, says Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella. Says it's important to capitalize on the technology, adding that AI is moving from an autopilot era to a co-pilot era. That's a CNBC exclusive. After 7 months, India's M&A watchdog gets a chairperson. Ravneet Kaur becomes the first woman to lead the Competition Commission of India. With this appointment, the CCI has the quorum to rule on over 200 anti-profiteering cases and 50 antitrust cases pending before it. Bharti Airtel's fourth quarter net profit grows by nearly 90% versus last quarter, beating Street's expectations. Revenue misses the estimates on the back of lower India mop-up. The giant telecom company's average revenue per user in India remains unchanged at 193 rupees per month. Vodafone PLC announces 11,000 job cuts as the new CEO says performance is not good enough and the telecom company must change. Expects little to no growth in the earnings in the new financial year. Union Minister Ashwini Vaishnav says that the government has made significant progress on the new Telecom Bill and expects it to be finalized by the month of July. Big tech companies like Google, Meta and Apple had opposed the draft Telecom Bill, citing threats to encryption. Government sources say India is not exclusively looking at semiconductor fabrication and is aiming to host the entire ecosystem. 15 months since the launch of this new semiconductor PLI scheme, the government is yet to finalize candidates. The World Health Organization cautions against artificial sweeteners, says they do not provide any long-term benefit in reducing body fat, warns that prolonged use increases the risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases and even death in adults. US-based Baron Capital Group marks down the Swiggy valuation by 40% to just over $6 billion. This comes days after Invesco cut the food aggregator's valuation twice in the last 4 months. Karnataka's wait for a new chief minister continues. Both former CM Siddaramaiah and State President DK Shivkumar stake their claim to the top post. Both meet party President Kharge. The newly elected MLAs have authorized Kharge to choose the new chief minister. Indian working women experience higher levels of stress and burnout compared to global counterparts and still face gender discrimination. A Deloitte report covering 500 women highlights that gender rights, financial security and physical and mental health are top concerns for women at workplaces. Well, straight to the day's trading action. A last hour saw the markets close at the day's low. Nifty and Sensex ended over 0.5% in the red. A big fall in HDFC and HDFC Bank weighed on the markets and dragged the Nifty lower. Nifty is back below the 18,300 mark. Broader markets outperformed the blue chips. Meanwhile, from the 3rd of July, the SGX Nifty will be called GIFT Nifty. All the SGX orders will be transferred to GIFT City. Approvals from the regulators in India and Singapore have been obtained, according to a spokesperson of the National Stock Exchange. Well, crude oil prices continue to trade sideways. Weaker than expected data from China triggered demand concerns. However, this was offset by supply worries caused by the United States' plans to refill its strategic petroleum reserves and wildfires in Canada. And relief for oil companies. The government cuts the windfall tax on crude petroleum to zero from 4,100 rupees per ton earlier. The special additional excise duty on aviation turbine fuel, diesel and petrol continues to remain nil. The changes will be effective from the 16th of May. Well, the fuel retailing joint venture of Reliance Industries and UK's BP has launched a premium diesel at regular prices with no additional cost for the first time ever in the Indian market. GOBP has said that the fuel will yield annual savings of 1.1 lakh rupees per truck. Well, artificial intelligence is moving fast, but in the right direction. So says the Microsoft CEO, Satya Nadella. His comments come weeks after Tesla CEO Elon Musk and other tech experts penned an open letter calling for a 6-month pause on AI development. In an exclusive conversation with CNBC's Andrew Sorkin, Nadella added that AI is moving from an autopilot era to a co-pilot era. Take a look.
A lot of AI is already there at scale, right? Every news feed, every sort of social media feed, search as we know of it before chat plus search. They're all on AI, and if anything, they're black boxes. They're more, I describe them as the autopilot era. So in an interesting way, we're moving from the autopilot era of AI to co-pilot era of AI. So if anything, I feel, yes, it's moving fast, but moving fast in the right direction. Moving fast where humans are more in control. First of all, humans are in the loop versus being out of the loop. It's a design choice, which at least we have made. So I feel that it's more important for us to capitalize on this technology and its promise around human agency and economic productivity.
Of course, how to regulate AI front and center today on Capitol Hill. And I asked Nadella if he were king for the day, how he would do it.
One of the first things, like we've done with cyber and other places, it will be good for companies. We don't have to wait for regulation, for all to have either standards or adopt the NIST standard and use that as, I'll call it, the start of any self-regulation. Then on top of that, if you talk about regulation, maybe we can unpack it from the application domain, because after all, context in which something is being applied, or it's being applied in education, it's being applied in healthcare, or it's being applied in retail. So I think we can have the regulatory frameworks that already exist in all these, whether it's consumer safety or financial regulations or what have you. We can have the current regs just hold AI accountable like they hold everything else accountable.
The other question I wanted to ask you about is big tech and the idea of incumbency. We did an interview with Lena Khan, and she effectively said, that she believes effectively that AI and these type of investments are going to help the incumbents, that actually it's going to be almost impossible for these smaller players to ever win, given the infrastructure that's required for them to succeed.
Look, there's no doubt that so far we've seen how these technologies really thrive on huge data sets, huge amounts of compute power, and that certain larger firms may have an advantage. What we need to do as law enforcers is ensure that the types of opportunities and openings for competition that these moments of technological disruption can present, that those moments are not being squashed out by the incumbents.
You know, it's a much more dynamic world. I mean, OpenAI is a startup, a couple of hundred people, Inflection, small startup, Character.ai, Cohere.
Could a small player win today in this space?
Could. I mean, like, you know, it all depends on what happens, right? Which is what's the product market fit that one of these folks finds, right? It's not a given that, you know, whether it's Alphabet or Microsoft are the only two games in town. I'm glad. I mean, think about this, Andrew. Who would have thought last year if you were sitting here and somebody had said to you, oh, you know what, there will be real contest around search. And people may actually have even a dream that there's an alternative to Google. There is not just Bing. There is ChatGPT and Bing, and there is lots of other folks who have entered the search market. I mean, that to me is sort of be celebrated.
And well, speaking of AI, government sources have told CNBC-TV18 that ministers of G7 nations are working closely to develop guardrails to regulate the use of artificial intelligence and that considerations are underway. Well, moving ahead to earnings season now, it's earnings. Bharti Airtel's fourth quarter net profit grew by nearly 90% versus last quarter, beating the street's expectations. Revenue missed estimates on the back of lower India mop-up. The telecom giant's average revenue per user in India remains unchanged at 193 rupees per month. Reema Tendulkar is here joining us now with her take on what these numbers mean and what these numbers mean for the coming quarters. Reema.
While consolidated revenues are a miss, the March margins have come in ahead of street expectations and profits are largely in line. So consolidated revenues for the company have gone up by 0.5%. This is lower than street expectations of 2%, and the miss is on account of lower India wireless revenues. So we were anticipating the India mobile revenues to go up 2.8% in Q4, but they've gone up by just 1%. So that's the reason for the miss on the top line. Margins have actually done better than what the street was anticipating at 52.2%. It's ahead of our expectations of 51.5%. Profits are showing you a big jump of nearly 90%, coming in at 3,000 crore rupees. But remember, in Q3, that's in the last quarter, the company had an exceptional loss of 670 crore. When it comes to the India wireless business, as I pointed out, there was a bit of a revenue miss, and that can be attributed to flat ARPUs, average revenue per user. The street was anticipating that ARPUs would improve for Bharti Airtel in Q4, but they have not. They remain stagnant at 193 crore, and this 193 rupees, and this could explain the miss on the India business top line. Subscriber growth has been fairly strong, and a little more than 3 million subscribers have been added on a quarter-on-quarter basis, and 4G subscribers continue to be extremely robust at 7.4 million on a sequential basis. Back to you.
Well, staying with telecom, British telecom giant Vodafone PLC has announced that it will lay off 11,000 employees in the next 3 years. The company's new CEO, Margarita Della Valle, has said that Vodafone's performance has not been good enough. She added that the company must change and has sought for a simple organization as it forecasts little to no growth in this financial year. The layoffs will impact 10% of Vodafone's total workforce. Well, back home after 7 months, India has a full-time chairperson for the Competition Commission. Ravneet Kaur has become the first woman to head the CCI. The organization has more than 250 pending cases related to anti-profiteering and antitrust issues. Parishit Luthra is here with more details. Parishit.
Yes, the Competition Commission has been without a permanent chairperson for 7 months now, and many crucial deals were pending approval. Now, because of the lack of quorum, the government had waived off the quorum requirement and allowed the 2 members, including the acting chairperson, to clear M&A deals. But there were many antitrust deals, almost 50 big deals, which are under probe, and the CCI chairperson has to clear the investigation outcomes on that front. At the same time, there are 200 cases related to anti-profiteering that the CCI has to approve and go through, and that also needs a nod of the CCI chairperson. So whenever Ravneet Kaur, the 1988 batch IS officer who will have a 5-year tenure, joins, she will really have her hands full. She'll have to hit the ground running. Apart from that, cement cartelization is a major investigation that she has to look into, conclude. Also, there is an investigation going on against hospitals for selling medicines and medical devices at inflated prices. So those are some of the big cases that she has to handle, and many of them are cases against the big tech and startups as well. Let's also not forget the Competition Amendment Bill 2023 has been passed, so rules and regulations to implement that have to be brought into place. She will also be a part of the committee which is looking at the possibility of bringing in a digital competition law to regulate market dominance of big tech companies.
Well, more than 15 months after notifying the semiconductor PLI scheme, the government is yet to finalize candidates. The government sources say that the telecom minister met with over 45 companies and some of the biggest players in the industry when he traveled to the US. In fact, what highly placed sources within the government are telling us is that the government is no longer benchmarking the progress of the semiconductor scheme with investments and applications coming in for fabrication, but rather is looking at the entire ecosystem. That's the word coming in from the ministry, from the highest leaders at the government, that they are no longer looking at, exclusively at fabrication, but they're also looking at the entire ecosystem. So whether that means gases, chemicals, power, all of that is on the table. In fact, speaking of what's on the table, the telecom minister Ashwini Vaishnav, during his travels to the US, spoke to some of these large companies and put this on record that India has a large talent pool. That is something that works in India's favor. We understand that the government has also committed to 20,000 megawatt of dedicated green energy, green power for these semiconductor facilities, and that is something that has also been placed on the table. And both these factors working together with India's unique position, sources tell us, is in fact something that has inspired confidence in a lot of these players, not just companies looking at fabrication, but also companies looking at design, technology, in terms of the entire supply chain. And that is going to be the focus going forward. And to that end, the government is working closely with India's Consul General in the Silicon Valley to ensure that there are bridges built between the US tech players as well as the Indian players, the Indian economy, and the Indian ecosystem. And that will be the thrust. The only caveat here is that this will have a longer play out time. We're looking at a longer term horizon of about 5 to 10 years. That's what highly placed sources within the government are telling us on the semiconductor push. But speaking of what the government says, well, Union Minister Ashwini Vaishnav has said that the government has made significant progress on the Telecom Bill and that it should be finalized by the month of July. Earlier, an industry body representing big tech companies, including the likes of Meta, Google and Apple, had opposed the draft bill, saying that it will force messaging platforms like WhatsApp to break encryption and to disclose messages to the government or surveillance orders. It also feared that the bill will strip individuals of the right to anonymity. Now, here's the minister on what the new telecom bill may look like and his indication for a timeline.
The primary focus is that telecom sector in India should be globally benchmarked, should be a sunrise sector, should have a lot of scope for innovation, should have a very simple regulatory framework, and the focus on customer protection, on user protection has to be the prime focus. इन सब चीजों को ध्यान में रखते हुए बिल की ड्राफ्टिंग में जो चेंजेस करने हैं उस पे काम चल रहा है अभी, and hopefully we should be able to finalize that somewhere by July, I would say.
Well, all three founders of fintech startup Zest Money have resigned. This comes 2 months after a deal with PhonePe had collapsed on account of due diligence concerns. 3 internal team members have been appointed to lead the company, while the founders will remain shareholders. In the earnings corner, Bank of Baroda beat estimates in the fourth quarter. Net profit grew nearly 170%, while the bank's net interest income registered a growth of 27% year-on-year. Asset quality improved sequentially, clocking the lowest gross and net NPA ratio in the last 8 years. In more earnings, Indian Oil Corporation has reported stellar set of numbers in the fourth quarter. The company has surpassed street's expectations across all parameters. Net profit grew by more than 50%, while revenue rose 10% year-on-year. The calculated gross refining margin for the company was at $16 per barrel versus the street's expectations of $13 per barrel. After conducting a successful roadshow, Air India Express has hired over 500 pilots and cabin crew members. The company said that nearly 300 pilots took part in the selection process. The recruitment drive was conducted in 10 cities, including Mumbai, Delhi, Bengaluru, and Chennai. Leh Airport has been closed for operations following many flight diversions and cancellations. This after Indian Air Force's transport aircraft, the C-17 Globemaster, faced technical issues and was grounded at the runway for maintenance work. According to the IAF, the issue is being rectified and the runway is expected to be made available for flying by tomorrow morning. The World Health Organization has cautioned against the use of artificial sweeteners. The UN body has warned that long-term use of artificial sweeteners does not really serve the purpose when it comes to reducing body weight and instead could pose health risks. The WHO has instead recommended that people reduce sugar intake in their diet altogether. Ekta Batra is joining us now with more details. Ekta, the WHO strongly advising against the consumption of artificial sweeteners. What else are you picking up?
Thanks for that. Well, yes, from sugar sachets to frozen desserts to baked goods, artificial sweeteners are present in many things we consume. And now the World Health Organization is raising the red flag on the substitutes for sugar. WHO has warned against the use of artificial and non-sugar-based sweeteners, especially to control body weight or reduce the risk of non-communicable diseases. The WHO warns against the use of artificial and non-sugar-based sweeteners such as aspartame, cyclamates, neotame, saccharin, sucralose, stevia and stevia derivatives. WHO says the long-term use of artificial sweeteners as as per the organization, increases the risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and even death in adults. Artificial sweeteners, according to WHO, have no nutritional value, are not essential in diets, and do not provide any long-term benefit in reducing body fat in adults or children. WHO's exception to this guideline, however, is individuals with pre-existing diabetes, and artificial sweeteners can also be used in personal and hygiene products such as toothpaste and medications. Otherwise, their guideline applies to all adults and children and for all manufactured foods and beverages which contain any and all sweeteners which are classified as artificial, either occurring naturally or synthetically. The WHO has said replacing artificial sugar with real sugar does not control weight in the long term, and people need to consider other ways to reduce their free sugar intake, say by consuming foods such as fruits with natural sugars. The other option, they point out, is to consume foods and drinks which are not sweet. All this, they recommend, should in fact begin early in life and could be done by reducing the sweetness in the diet as a whole. While the WHO has warned against all artificial sweeteners, this is not the first warning for the industry, which is worth over $15 billion globally currently. On the latest WHO report, manufacturers of some of the top artificial sweetener brands in India say it is not a comprehensive enough study, but experts say the wind might be blowing towards companies looking at low-calorie sugar or sugar derivative substitutes, which the WHO is okay with. Lastly, there are differing views on non-sugar sweeteners. For example, the US drug regulator, the US FDA, has approved 6 sugar substitutes in the US and has given a generally recognized as safe or GRAS status to stevia and monk fruit, which are plant-based or natural, to the extent that stevia is also considered safe for pregnant women as well.
Well, with that, it's time now to head into a very short break. But coming up next, Indian working women experience higher levels of stress and burnout compared to global counterparts and still face gender discrimination. Details when we come back. Welcome back. In some national headlines now, Karnataka's wait for a new chief minister continues. Both former CM Siddaramaiah and State President DK Shivkumar have staked their claim to the top post. Both met the party President Kharge. Newly elected MLAs have authorized Kharge to choose the new chief minister. The onset of monsoons could be delayed slightly. The Met Department has said that monsoon onset over Kerala is likely to be on June 4th, with a model error of 4 days. 5 people were killed and 7 others injured after an explosion at an illegal firecracker unit in West Bengal's East Midnapur district. The police said that the impact was so tremendous that the residential building which housed the factory collapsed. Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee has announced a CID investigation of this incident. Well, Indian working women experience high levels of stress and burnout compared to global counterparts and still face gender discrimination. A Deloitte report covering over 500 women has highlighted that gender rights, financial security, and physical and mental health are top concerns for women at their workplaces. Shilpa Ranipeta has pored over this entire report. She joins us now. Shilpa, tell us, what are you picking up?
Well, the role of women at the workplace, especially in white-collar jobs, has vastly improved over the past few years. However, this survey by Deloitte India on women at work for 2023 shows that while there are signs of progress for women at the workplace, several concerns still persist. Now, the survey covering 500 women across sectors and age groups has revealed that women in India and across the world say that their rights, financial security, and their physical and mental health are their top concerns as we speak. Now, the report has found that women in India have slightly higher stress levels and burnout as compared to their global counterparts. 53% women say that their stress levels are higher than a year ago, while only 38% feel like there is enough mental health support from their employers. And even lesser number of women feel comfortable talking about it at work. Now, less than half the women surveyed say that they have a work-life balance, and only 39% feel that they can switch off completely while not at work. And despite organizations working towards diversity and inclusion, nearly half the women that were surveyed have experienced non-inclusive behaviors at their workplace. And as a result, lesser flexibility and no proper work-life balance are some of the top reasons why women want to quit their job. Let's look at the flexibility aspect first. 97% of the women surveyed feel requesting for a flexible working opportunity will likely affect their chances of getting promoted, while 95% feel that the workload also is not just adjusted accordingly, and 48% feel that they do not get enough support while they try to balance work with other important commitments. Now, organizations too still have a long way to go in their effort towards gender diversity, with 91% women feeling like their workplace isn't taking concrete steps towards gender diversity, while nearly half of them say that the organization has not improved in its commitment towards gender diversity over the past year, and a third of women wouldn't recommend their organization or their workplace to friends and families as a great place to work at. And in most of these parameters, India actually fares worse off than the global average. And in conclusion, the survey recognizes that the organizations or companies need to address flexibility and gender diversity to ensure better employee engagement and retention at the workplace. I also spoke to Nilesh Gupta, the director at Deloitte India, about women participation in the white-collar workforce and why there is still not enough representation even at a senior management level. Listen in.
Some of the reasons that stood true for our blue-collar workforce also stand true for our white-collar workforce. The two critical events of marriage and childbirth are the ones where the maximum attrition happens, and organizations are trying their best to create retention practices so as to bring back this workforce after these two events, more importantly, after childbirth. And higher education is also a contributing factor in the white-collar workforce. So yes, the workforce participation drops as you cross levels of management.
Well, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of India Business Hour. Thank you so much for watching. News and updates continue right here on CNBC TV 18.